like this, and just want to get out and get going in the garden, but it's a little soon, don't get too excited, but there are things you can start doing with the plant. So, you should have a copy of our outline that we're going to do today, as well as I tried to bring enough copies of the Gardener Idea book, which doesn't really have a lot of information in it about raised gardening beds, but it might get you in the mood for other kind of gardening if you want. A lot of flowers and things like that to get you excited. But what we're going to talk about today is this raised bed gardening, and Diana said that we have some raised beds here, and I'm not sure how big they are, but we could probably talk a little bit about that. But when you're gardening with raised beds, you've got to consider them as a form of a container garden. It's not like gardening in the landscape. You have to have some different things in mind when you're putting those together. So what we're going to do is kind of go through that a little bit here. First of all, we got the advantage of doing raised beds. They allow you to maximize your space, and more so than a typically smaller garden. And it makes it more convenient too for you to have a raised bed, especially if you don't like to bend over a lot or get on your knees a lot. The raised beds really work well. Beds are usually filled with high-quality soil mixes that have large amounts of organic matter, which improves drainage and may increase yields. Yes?
Can you suggest?
Pardon me?
Can you suggest any ones that are particularly good?
Mixes?
The soil mixes?
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, sure are. The next one is the soil raised above the ground level tends to drain better, warm up quicker in the spring, so you can get out there and start working the soil and plant seeds maybe a little bit earlier than you would in the ground because the soil is a little bit warmer. Higher soil levels and improved soil quality offers better access, less maintenance, and easier harvest. Soil mixes that have large amounts of organic matter improves drainage and may increase yields. The dense planting techniques result in higher production per square foot compared to like working in your normal garden. You usually have reduced weed problems with raised beds, and allows you to maximize all available space, and are typically smaller than traditional gardens, making them more convenient option in areas with limited space. So especially like in an area like this where you don't have the ability to have a big field of gardening, you can do the raised beds, which is convenient and saves space. Soil raised above ground level tends to drain better, warm up easier. Higher soil levels and improved soil quality offers better access, less maintenance. Raised bed gardens can be entered and maintained soon after rains or irrigations without compacting soils because you're not walking on it. You don't need to get the rototiller out, no expensive power equipment needed. And the formal orderliness and arrangement of raised beds can be attractive and a good addition to your landscape around here. So those are some of the advantages. Some of the disadvantages we want to talk about is they do tend to dry out quicker in the hot summer months. You sometimes have a limited ability to rotate your crops, so it's the same thing if you plant tomatoes in the same place year after year. They have a tendency to have a reduced yield, a bigger problem with diseases and things like that. So those are some things you have to be aware of with a raised bed as well. You don't want to keep planting the same thing in the same spot every year in the raised bed. Let's see. The increased plant density may increase some pest concerns, especially like funguses, foliar diseases, even with some insect problems. And then there's the raised beds may not be suitable for some different vegetables. I put watermelons here because it's just hard to get watermelons sprawling out all over the place, and it's pretty hard to keep them in. If there was a good bush watermelon that grows baby little watermelons, that would be great, but there's not a real good one out there for that. So let's go back. We're going to talk a little bit about each one of these items that we've mentioned here. The first thing And I'm not sure, I haven't seen, somebody tell me the dimensions of some of these raised beds?
Spread out wall.
They're like 8 foot.
Yeah, they're basically 8 by 3 to 4 feet wide.
Okay, and then, so it looks like it's about maybe 3 feet off the ground, too? Okay. So, that's a pretty good sized bed. So you don't have to be as concerned about using bagged mixes. If you have a good topsoil mix in those, you can usually get by with very little amendments. The smaller the bed, though, the bigger problem you have with maintaining the soil in the bed. So if you try to put dirt, just regular dirt into a raised bed, you're going to have a poor crop. You got to have good drainage, and usually you have to have a good topsoil. You want to use some compost, like a manure compost, and like a peat-based type of mix, because when you do that, you'll have good drainage, and you won't get the compaction that you get from using dirt. So if you just had dirt in there, what happens is the particles of the soil really stick together, and it's really difficult for the roots to spread out. So you'd want to get a good, like I say, something with peat, manure compost, and topsoil. Usually, especially in a raised bed of that size, that would be great. If it's smaller, you'd want to use just more of a peat-based mix, just like you would like in a hanging basket or a container that you put on your porch. You want to have that good drainage. The next thing is that you want to determine the types of plants you want to have. You can do just about anything in a raised bed. Obviously, the bigger the bed, the more you can put in and the bigger types of plants you can have. But you end up with a decision you have to make regarding how big you want those plants to be in each bed. So if you have several like you do here, you might want to have one bed designated for the taller crops, and then one bed designated for the shorter, and one for the medium, and one for the real small. That way, they're not competing for nutrients and sunlight. And there again, it's really wide open. I mean, I've seen beds with corn in them, and that always seemed to me like a difficult one just because it can really shade out the other plants where they're not going to get the sunlight that they need. But yeah, you can do just about any vegetable or herb in the beds. The next thing you want to determine though is how you want to use it. A lot of people can start with and enjoy starting with seeds. That's a little more difficult because of the way the soil is in a raised bed. Like I said, if it's got that peat-based mix and if it's got the high drainage, the seeds that you plant in there might miss out on a good watering when it's necessary. So, I suggest people start with starts. Plant your seeds inside, put them by the window, use a little peat pots or things like that to get them going. And then you can transplant them outside when it's warm enough. But if you just plant the seeds right in the raised bed, it is going to be harder. You're going to lose a lot just because it's just so hard to keep up with giving them the water at the right time. Let's see, the vining plants, I mentioned that already, that they're a little bit more difficult to grow. Some of like an acorn squash or like watermelons and muskmelons, they are tough just because they get so massive and they spread out all over the place. Even with something that big, you could try it in a big bed, but you're always going to have to make sure the vines are staying up and not falling over the side, because then the melons won't grow properly if they're just up in the air and hanging down. But if you wanted to do something like with the cucumbers or pickles, we've done that before, where you, if you have like an A-frame trellis, you can get those like the burpless cucumbers growing up the trellis, and that'll keep it upright, it'll be in the sun, and then they'll grow properly. Plant placement is another important area, because Like I said before, you want to make sure that the taller plants are more in the back. And by the back, I mean farthest away from the sun, so you're not shading the shorter things in the front. If you have the short things in the back where they don't get enough sunlight, they're going to be stunted. They'll grow really weak. So you want to make sure that they're getting enough sunlight and that they're growing nice and strong stems so that they'll give you the best crop that they can. The plant placement, yeah, like I gave some examples here. Corn versus tomatoes, you know, if you do plant corn in a bed, you want to make sure it's on the north side, away from the sun, so that the shorter things are in front, so the sun can get to it. So tomatoes would want to be next. You'd want to have those next, and then if you wanted something like a leaf crop, I put beets here. You know, it's just a little plant growing from seed. Those would be in the front just because they're so short, but they definitely need sunlight as well to grow properly.
Question.
Yes.
If you start a root crop such as beets or carrots, can you transplant them easily if you start them from seed?
Those are a little bit more difficult to transplant. That's what those two I would probably say. Like radishes is another one where you know, little lettuce. Those are all pretty easy to start from seed. It would be the bigger things like you get into like the tomatoes and peppers, things like that are sensitive to water needs.
Okay.
That'd be harder to
So
grow
the root
just from
crops are
seed.
best just to start in the ground and weed them out as they're too close.
Yes, yeah. Then you can start thinning them out and
All right.
making give them a little space. So I gave a little bit of an idea on the spacing as well. That's important because if it's too close together, they're going to crowd each other out. You're going to lose the ability for them to produce properly. They're not going to yield as much as they would if they had the correct space. But if you get them too far apart, you're not going to utilize all the space that you could possibly use. So there's a fine line. I gave a kind of a little bit of a guideline here on how far to plant things apart. You've got squash and tomatoes at 2 feet, peppers at 1.5 feet. And then it goes down from there. Cabbage and potatoes and corn is 1 foot. Beans and peas, you're getting down to 4 to 6 inches. And things like the lettuce and radishes, beets, you can put those pretty tight together and then thin them out as they start to grow. Now watering, that's a difficult, it's like a container garden. So the watering is very important because it is raised up off the ground. You've got you know, breezes and winds that affect plants that are a little bit higher off the ground than if they were in the ground. So you got to pay a lot more attention to the watering needs. And that's why I suggested that if it's possible to just put a drip system together. You can get parts for that at Lowe's. Mr. Landscaper is a really good brand where you can get all the little dripper nozzles and the timers and the adjustable flow on how much you want flowing out.
What was that one called?
It's called Mr. Landscaper, and it's at Lowe's. And if you're ever out at the greenhouse, I can show you how we have ours set up. It's all in my parents' home, which is right next to the greenhouse there. We've got a drip system set up for all of their containers, and it's really easy to do. And once you do it, you'll never want to go back to trying to water it by hand. The next thing is just the fertilizing. And for vegetables, things like that, you just need a good balanced fertilizer. I just recommend a 12-12 here. That usually is good enough to give you a good, well-rounded base for most vegetable plants, herbs, things like that. I also suggested a few organic fertilizers there that if you're more prone to that, you can use bone meal and blood meal, manure, things like that that will give about the same amount of nutritional value that a synthetic fertilizer would. So just something to consider. And then the next thing is just the pests. I mean, that's very important, especially if we get a lot of rain especially in July when we get those temperature fluctuations at night and during the day. You get 90-degree temperatures during the day, and if it rains or if it gets a lot of dew, it's a very good breeding ground for funguses. So you want to have a good fungicide on hand, like copper, which is organic, and it takes care of just about any kind of disease out there that you're going to experience in the garden. It's one where you don't have to do it every time after it rains, but if you do it every couple weeks, every 3 weeks or so in the summer, it'll give you enough protection to get through, and you won't have any kind of a problem then. For insects, there's a lot of good insecticides for vegetables and herbs. Neem oil is a good one, organic, and it takes care of most pests. You just have to use it a little more frequently than you would.
What's it called?
Neem, N-E-E-M oil.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's a good one. But up to this point, is there any questions? Did I go too fast, or if anybody has any questions, I can answer them here. Yes?
So when we put the gardens in, there was sand on the bottom, and then there was a garden soil, right? I mean, it was a pot, like a regular
It was a mix of soil and
garden
compost,
soil. So it was good soil. And then the next year, this is the third year?
This is our
The
third
next year, we added a couple of bags of cow manure to each one.
Okay.
Because it settled, so we topped it off with the cow manure. So what do you think we should add this year? Is there anything, should we add some peat or?
Well, it sounds like you're doing well with what you have. You just want to keep adding the good stuff.
Yeah.
And it's good to have that sand
It's
and
good.
even rocks on the lower end of helping the drainage.
Mhm.
But yeah, just keep adding the compost, especially composted manure is really good.
Yeah.
Add a bag or two of that to each one and you should be fine. Are the beds cleaned out every year?
Yeah, we could go look at them.
Okay,
In fact, it'd be nice if you wanted to look at them and see what you thought.
Sure.
I think they're nice.
yeah.
Yeah. There's still some, what do you got out there? There's some
Garlic.
flowers or something left.
Oh, the magnolia, marigolds.
Those are just dead, yeah, so we
Yeah.
can use the seeds or marigolds. But
Marigolds,
there's
there
some,
we go.
we planted, what do you call it, garlic at the end of last year, so
Oh,
that should
okay.
be coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we put garlic in that one bed,
I just wanted to say that you want to clean them out, except for the things you overwinter. Get all the old stuff out because that can be a diseased breeding ground and keeps insects alive, things like that. So as long as you're cleaning them out the beds, then, just add a little bit of topsoil and maybe a little bit of the peat or composted manure, and that'll really just keep it fresh every year. The thing you want to get away from is just you don't want to plant tomatoes in the same spot every year because if you do, they will go downhill very quickly.
We've rotated those.
Yeah, that's good. If you can keep those rotated, peppers as well, you shouldn't have a problem then. I just wanted there's a quick video here that I wanted to show. I don't know if you've ever heard of Laura at Garden Answers. She's got a ton of videos on gardening. And I would suggest that if you have any question whatsoever about gardening, she will have a video about it. So I was going through, she's got probably 10 videos just on raised beds. So you can check some of those out. She's got, I don't know if you can see behind her here, but those are all raised beds behind her. And she's got it all laid out where she calls it her kitchen, her raised bed kitchen. So if you have any questions, that's where you need to go. Let me see if I can.
Those emotions, they were put on hold by time, but at Claire's bridal weekend at a Verbo Beach House, those emotions also made the trip.
Hey guys, how's it going? Today I want to talk about raised beds, some of the most commonly asked questions that we get about them, like what to build them out of, what kind of soil to use. I'm going to gear this more toward beginner gardeners, for those of you who are maybe trying to decide whether or not it's worth the effort to put in raised beds. I'm not going to be installing anything or planting in them because we have several videos about that. I just want to answer some of those common questions. The first question is, why would you want to grow your garden in raised beds? And I think there are several answers depending on your situation. For me, the most important thing is that I get to control the growing medium. So the soil that goes in my raised beds, I know exactly what's in it. And maybe you have a garden that does not have very good soil, you're having a really hard time growing things. Well, if you can either blend your own soil or buy a pre-blended mix to put in your beds, it's the perfect medium for growing your things. And then you know, like, because whatever your vegetables and fruit are growing in, you know they're sucking in nutrients and things from that growing medium, and then you know what you're putting in your own body. And that's really important to me. Another really nice thing about raised beds is that you can get or build raised beds that are taller. So if you have back or knee problems, you can bring gardening up to a level that's comfortable and doable for you, because gardening is a lot of work. It's a ton of up and down. I mean, planting, weeding, harvesting. It's a lot on your body. So if that's keeping you from gardening, putting in raised beds that are taller is really, really nice. And a couple of really nice benefits of raised beds is that they drain better, because like I said, if you've got really bad soil, maybe it holds on to too much moisture, you put something like this up above that, and the water has a much easier time draining out, keeping your plants happier, and they're much easier to maintain in terms of weeds. They also enable a longer growing season. Because the soil in raised beds heats up a lot quicker in the spring, you get several more weeks of growing out of them than you would straight in the ground. And for me, this is kind of a purely aesthetic reason, but raised beds tend to make a garden look tidy. You can lay it out exactly how you want it to. I've got some custom beds that are in a L shape that I really love. It creates a centerpiece in my garden, and sometimes creating a space that's more tidy and pretty makes you want to spend more time in it. Question number 2 is, what kind of wood should I use to build my raised beds? And you can honestly use pretty much anything that holds soil to create your raised beds. I do know that in terms of wood, the top 2 that I'm aware of choices are cedar and redwood. Cedar and redwood are both highly rot resistant, and they can withstand a lot of water and soil up next to them for a really long time. I've got some cedar raised beds from Gardener Supply back behind our greenhouse that I stacked one on top of the other and made some really tall, nice raised beds back there. These right here are made out of 2x12 redwood, and they've been in this garden space 3 or 4 years, and they're doing really, really well. They start out, of course, the bright redwood color, but they quickly age and patina to kind of this light gray, which I actually prefer. So I think both are really good choices. Now, I don't know all there is to know about wood, so there may be some other good choices of wood that last for a long time, up against water and things like that. But you could use other things. I mean, we've set up kits before. Like, if maybe you're in a position where you want to start gardening, but you don't want to have to go get tools and build your own raised bed. We have put together like the veg pod. Last year we did that. It's a standing raised bed, heavy duty plastic. I think you can get multiple different sizes, but it even has like a greenhouse cover with a misting system. Like, you can get really intense with it. We're also putting together this year, it's a 2x4 cedar patio planter. That one's also from Gardener Supply. We're going to put that together for one of our family members that has just a balcony to garden on. So I think that's perfect. Like, there's all different kinds of things that you can use based on, well, style or your situation in terms of size and space, because you may not have, a big sprawling area to put raised beds. Maybe you're just gardening on a patio, which I have done a lot of in the past. So there's lots of different kinds of kits or ideas out there to help you put together something that will fit your situation. And honestly, you can even use common board, pine, whatever free wood you can get your hands on, so long as it hasn't been pressure treated or chemically treated. Some pallets have been chemically treated, so you want to be careful with those. But if you can get your hands on those kinds of things to build yourself raised beds, that's excellent. They may not last quite as long as a redwood or cedar, but they're definitely more cost effective. Question number 3 is, what soil should I fill my raised beds with? And there are several good answers depending on the scope of your project. If you are a beginner or if your project is small, I would just go with the pre-bagged raised bed mix. Espoma's got a good one. They're easy to move around. They are specifically blended for this application, and your plants are going to be happy in that. And I feel like if it's a small project, it's still cost effective to use bagged. And if you're a beginner, it's really important to use the right product and to keep it easy. That way, the more success you have that first time that you're gardening, the more you'll want to keep going, and it's so rewarding that way. Now, if your project is bigger, if you've got a lot of raised beds to fill, it's not quite as cost effective to use bagged. If you want to still do that, go for it. It is easier, in my opinion, to move bagged around than to move bulk around. But what I would do is call around to local businesses that's the type that sell like bulk mulch or gravel, compost. Oftentimes they'll have a mixed raised bed mix. Ask them what's in it. I have used both good ones and bad ones. We happened upon a really, really great one. So I'll share the percentages of what our blend is. It's 56% premium topsoil, which is a soil that's not heavy, it's really lofty, it's also free of rocks and weed seeds. So it's a really clean soil. Then 34% Cascade Compost, which we have a forest called Cascade nearby, and it's basically just composted forest materials. So leaves, branches, wood, things like that that have been through the composting process, and then 34% of the mix is made up of that, and then the last 10% is composted manure. And we've had that blend in these boxes for 3 or 4 years now, and it's been so great. My plants have done really well in it. It hasn't compacted, but it is important to continually add good stuff back in. So you can add in good compost back in, like the Land and Sea. You can add in your own compost that you've made at home, which is great. I also add in a starter fertilizer, the Biotone, every time I plant a new crop. And it's just important because these are raised up kind of like containers. They're more moisture that the soil receives, rain, snow, or from sprinkling. It can leach out nutrients. So we just need to be mindful of adding those things back in to make our raised beds last really long and have a lot of success. What you don't want to use is some unknown source of soil. Maybe your friends have a pile of soil sitting around because they had a house built or something, and so they've got this pile just sitting there free for the taking. It's tempting because it's free, but you don't know if there's noxious weed seeds in there or if it's ever been touched by chemicals. And one of the major benefits of gardening in raised beds is that you know what's going into your food. So using organic things, I think, is really important. Question number 4 is, what kind of plant should I start with raised beds as a beginner? And honestly, you can plant anything you want in raised beds. I have strawberries in raised beds. I've planted corn, vine crops, zucchini, tomatoes, peppers. I mean, all of it. Root crops. I do potatoes. In fact, I'm planting potatoes in mine today. So you can pretty much plant anything you want. A couple of things you want to keep in mind is that you really want to plant heavy on the things that your family actually eats. And I know it's super tempting when you're standing in front of the seed racks or you're down at the greenhouse looking at all the fun plant starts. You want to try it all. It's a good idea just to add 1 or 2 new things into your garden every season and really plant heavy on everything that you'll actually utilize. Because I've done it before where I've gotten really excited and I've planted up my space with stuff that we don't really enjoy eating, and so a lot of the times I'm finding myself just giving it away and wishing that I had more corn or wishing that I had more bell peppers, something like that. You also want to make sure that you do not overcrowd your raised beds. Because overcrowded plants are stressed plants, and stressed plants are more susceptible to insects and diseases, so be mindful of that. The crops that I think are the easiest to start are radishes, for one, especially if you've got kids. Radishes have a 20 to 25 day turnaround in harvest time, so you plant them from seed, you're harvesting in 20 to 25 days. That's almost instant gratification. So I always love to put some radishes in my garden. I mean, beans and peas are really easy. Tomatoes and peppers, if you get those as plants, are really easy. Corn is great. Zucchinis, squash, carrots, beets. I mean, there's lettuce and spinach. There's so many. It's just kind of creating a list and maybe start on the small side and just grow a few things first and then add to it every year. If you were a beginner, I probably wouldn't recommend melons. I have been gardening for a long time and I still have problems growing watermelon. Question number 5 is, what kind of fertilizer should I be using? And I would definitely start with something organic because for food production that's really important. And like I mentioned earlier, every time I plant a new crop, I work that Biotone starter fertilizer into the soil. It has mycorrhizae in it, which helps with root development and helps establish a plant quick and gets the root system nice and bulky. And then you can use garden tone or plant tone. They're really good, more all-purpose fertilizers, but you can certainly go crazy. I mean, there's all different kinds that are specifically, like very specifically blended for specific crops. There's tomato tone, berry tone, citrus tone. So if that's something that really interests you and you want to give that plant exactly the nutrients it needs, you can definitely go nuts with the type of fertilizer, but I would say Biotone is a starter fertilizer when you're planting your crop, and then a side dress of plant tone or garden tone like mid-season is a really good idea. And the last question, number 6, is how do I water my raised beds? A couple of different ways to do that. There's drip irrigation and overhead water. There are pros and cons to both of them. My personal recommendation is a drip system because I feel like it's more efficient and it's better for the plants. We have done videos about it, so we will link our most recent drip irrigation video down below if that's something that interests you. But the pros of a drip system is that it's efficient, it's targeted watering, you can put the drip line right at the plant's root zone, so you're not wasting water, and most of the time plants don't want to have their leaves or their produce covered in water every day or every other day or however often you're watering. The cons to a drip system is you may not have water access really close by, so it might be a little bit more difficult to set up. It is a little more intensive in its setup. It requires more parts, but once you have it in place, it's fairly easy to maintain and it's there. You know, you might have to swap parts out here and there every so often, but it's just so worth the effort, I think. Overhead watering for us is really something we can't do in a lot of applications because our water is so hard. So what happens is the water rests on the leaves and it creates white deposits, hard water deposits, and then eventually the plants start to suffer and they die. So we have to do targeted watering, except for our grass. Our grass is the only thing that receives overhead water, and it seems to do okay because we're constantly cutting our grass. So all of they don't have a chance to really build up on the blades of the grass. Overhead watering, also you can lose a lot of it to evaporation when it's really hot outside, and a lot of it will hit foliage and just roll off in opposite direction than their roots are. It doesn't necessarily, if you're overhead watering, mean that it's going to make it to their root system like it does with the drip system. And the last thing I wanted to mention, it's not a question, it's just something that's I think very helpful, especially if you're kind of floundering and not knowing how to lay out your raised beds. Like you know what you want to grow, but you don't know what space they need and how you should plant them exactly. We're going to link a kitchen garden planner down below. I've showed it to you before. It's just super helpful. There's a whole bunch of pre-planned gardens you can choose from, or you can lay out your own based on the crops you want to grow. But it shows you, like in a 3x6 or 4x8 or whatever size of bed you have, how you can effectively lay out your produce. And I have been gardening for a long time and I really enjoy using that tool. So check that out in the comment section or the description of this video if you need help with that. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope that this has been helpful, maybe answering some of those questions you might have about raised beds. I really do feel like raised beds are a really good solution for so many different things, and I think they're fun to grow in, they're easy to grow in, and I hope you guys give it a try. Thanks for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one.
We're for the bold, the daring, the kitchen creators and flavor trailblazers. However you bring up the flavor.
So just give you a little idea of maybe another perspective on raised beds, but like I say, she's got a lot of different videos if you want to get more information from her. So is there any other questions I can help you with? Or I just think about this when I was a kid, before we had the greenhouses, we didn't have raised beds. We had to pick beans and peas on the ground, on our knees, peas in the spring, beans in the summer, potatoes in the fall, and I spent half my time, I think, on my knees. So I did not want to do that for the rest of my life, so I'm glad we went to greenhouses. But yeah, yes.
You know, we grew peppers out here a couple of years and we didn't really have that great of luck with them, like bell peppers. I've been trying to grow bell peppers at home for forever, and it's all plant, and then the buds come, and you know they're late, and I don't get any produce off of them.
Sometimes you get that. It could be that the blooms get a fungus on them, and it basically takes away the pepper.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to, it's kind of like the tomato blossom rot.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing kind of happens with peppers when they start out. So you might want to just hit it with a fungicide before it starts to set
and we
plants.
didn't seem to have much luck out here either with peppers.
Yeah, I would just go with the fungicide early on.
Okay.
That should help it. Yes.
Can I just ask about critters? I did raise bed out on my deck. I have a huge deck the length of my house last year. And I had, not chicken wire, but a green wire around everywhere to keep the critters away. But they still climb up the wire. And I could actually watch the squirrels come and pluck my tomatoes off or my peppers and just chew on them and discard them. I'm just frustrated with critters.
Oh, I know.
Is there a product to use to turn them away?
Yeah, there's a company in Niles that actually makes a good product. It's called Repellex.
Repellex?
And takes care of deer, squirrels, bunnies. Organic, it's one of those where you just put it on maybe once every 6 weeks. And,
Okay, so I need to buy stock in that company.
yeah.
Okay.
And there's some other ones too. Liquid Fence is a good one.
Messina Wildlife, they do.
Which one?
Messina.
Oh, Messina, yeah. Yeah, that's another good
And
one.
you can sometimes get that at, that place in Surfing. Menards.
Yeah, we used to
Menards.
carry that Messina, but we can't get it anymore for some reason. But
Well,
that was a good
I got
one.
it last year, because it's great for the deer.
Yes,
It's really good.
and it smells good too. Liquid
Yeah.
Fence, there's
It's meaty.
yes,
Smells like
has that mint smell. They use peppermint, I think, it is part of it. Liquid Fence stinks bad. It's putrescent egg. It's nasty. If you don't want to be downwind when you're spraying it. But
And like
it works really well.
Critter is just basically urine, like a predator urine.
Like
that
coyote
keeps
urine.
other animals away.
Yeah.
But it smells pretty bad too.
I was wondering how they got that.
I watched the deer come up to the fence and ready to go and devour,
Mhm.
and they've gone and sneezed and off.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
just don't want to know.
And then once they get that, a couple times, they
They
just
don't
avoid
come
the
back.
place altogether. So same with the rabbits too. If they get it in their senses, they stay away. Usually, like for our vegetable garden, I'll use the Liquid Fence or the Messina or whatever we have at the time. And usually, I just do it once a year, once in the spring, and usually that just keeps them. They remember that and they stay away from it for the whole season. But it's good to reapply it probably every 6 weeks or so because of rains and things like that that might wash it off. So yeah, so there are good products out there though.
Okay.
Keep the critters away.
They're bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I seem to they just love to come and dine at our place.
Well, the next step is a BB gun.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. Oh, and plus we feed the birds and that just draws more in. So,
Oh, yeah.
They wanna eat that good seed too.
Yes.
The Repellex, is that, safe for dogs?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it's organic and, yeah, it doesn't hurt the animals, but it'll probably keep the dog away.
Oh. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
You won't be digging up your flower bed.
Yeah, Dinah.
Jerome, you said that the Repellex was from Niles. Was that a store or is that for?
Well, that's where it's manufactured.
Oh, okay.
So we sell it at the greenhouse.
Okay,
but
very
that's,
good. So we
but it
can
is
get-
manufactured in Niles, right on, I think it's on 3rd Street, kind of north of 12, I think.
Okay.
Just a little, it's kind of off the road.
Oh, where
It's
the
kinda-
old mushroom factory was.
Pardon me?
Where the old mushroom factory is.
Right across the road, yep.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, thank you. So everyone in Vite Greenhouse, you can pick up these items as well.
Yeah. Well. there's
Any
no
other questions?
What
Is
about
it,
like when do you recommend planting the different crops?
Well, if you wanted to do starts, you could start your seed, kind of at the end of the month. If you had a place inside by a window or somewhere to do that. Otherwise, you just want to make sure that some things are past the date of that last freeze. I don't know if you noticed on a couple of her raised beds, she had like a covering.
Yeah.
That's good for kind of a frost protection. So you could have something like that if you really wanted to start early. But you just have to be careful of the late frost. And if it does look like it is going to frost, then just throw a sheet over the top. But I would say like for the tomatoes and peppers and things like that, mid-May is usually a good time. You could do lettuce and, early cabbage,
Radishes.
cauliflower, broccoli, that stuff can really be started earlier.
And peas you do real
Peas
good.
can be started earlier, yep. That could be in 3rd week of April, maybe, last week of April. Start planting those seeds and sticking them out.
Radishes, and could even go in now, really, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, they're really hardy, really tough.
So other cold weather things like the cruciferous vegetables and such, you could start early?
Yeah.
Okay.
mean, it's probably still a little bit early because, you know, like last week we just had
Yeah.
temperatures in the mid-teens, and so, you know, stuff like that'll wipe out just about anything, so.
It's supposed to snow next week.
Yeah,
Oh,
so once we're into that high 20s, you know, when the average low is in the high 20s, we're pretty safe for those types of plants.
When are you gonna open?
April 19th is our opening this year.
Is it early?
A little bit later than usual. We usually open April 1st, but
Last year was terrible.
yeah, we opened. We were able to open on the
July?
yeah first or it was the last Monday of April last year. So yeah,
Oh, it's even later than that.
yeah.
And then when you do,
You
and
ran
everybody
out.
got in there and got their stuff.
Yeah, it was
I couldn't
crazy.
get anything.
It was
Couldn't get there in
unbelievable.
time.
Well, nobody could do anything except garden, so that was good for us. Bad for everybody else. Who needed
For a while,
to
you
do
couldn't
things.
buy seeds or anything, so.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
they
Seeds
don't
were
do
bought
that
up.
this year, we'll be okay.
Are you upping your production this year?
Not a lot. I mean, there's only so much you can do with our space. We added a greenhouse this past year, which gives us a little bit of space, but so I would say probably a little bit more than we did last year. Last year we were scared because when this whole thing came out, we didn't know if we were even going to be able to open.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah, there was
really,
no landscaping.
yeah,
They
it
weren't
was.
allowing landscapers.
Yeah, they weren't allowing basically anything, and it got to the 1st of April, and we had probably 3 shipments of plants left to come in, and we canceled all of them just because we didn't know what we were gonna be able to sell, and we didn't want to be stuck. We already got 15 greenhouses full of plants, and then if we couldn't sell these, so we canceled them, which if we knowing what we do now, I wish we would have kept them, but at the time, you're like, wow, if we,
Yeah.
It's a lot of money if you can't sell it.
right,
So,
yeah, exactly, and
It's time and
all the
people and.
production time and everything you got into it, so.
So get there on April 19th.
Yeah. Please come out. Hopefully we won't have anything like we did last year, so.
Is there anything really hot this year? Any new things that are really?
Oh, we got a ton
really
of things.
in demand?
Gotta come out and see them. No, we got, there's a lot of, I mean, the breeding in plants, especially flowers and perennials, is just, you know, pollinator gardens are really big, so, you know, things like heucheras, agastaches, which are hyssop. That's a big pollinator plant. And they're just, it used to be, it came in one color, was blue. But now it's yellows, blues, pinks, purples, you know, things like that. So, you know, there's just a lot of breeding going on that it makes gardening fun.
Yeah.
You don't have to be stuck with the same thing year after year.
I think gardening probably became more popular last year because people couldn't get out and do anything.
Yeah, exactly. There was no little league.
People were
no-
working in their yards.
People couldn't do, get out and do the things that they normally did, so.
Right.
My fear is though that the people that tried gardening for the first time got to June and they thought, where'd all these weeds come from? And it went from this down to, so it'll be interesting to see if those people come back again for plants this year, because I know there was a lot of first-time gardeners last year, and they made last-time gardeners too.
I think a lot of it was food security.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't know if they were gonna be able to get to the grocery store and get food.
Right.
So they were growing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and there again, people probably, I think some people thought they were, just feeding for their family, and they ended up getting enough to feed China. Just a ton of stuff, and they didn't really need to get as much as they did, but, it was interesting.
Do you have recommendations on how to grow rhubarb? Which always, growing up, we had it in our backyard and it was like a weed. But I have mostly sandy soil here, and I've twice tried to start it, and it grows great the first year, and then it just doesn't.
It's really hard to get rhubarb starts anymore. Most of the starts you get, like what we sell at the greenhouse, are grown from tissue culture. So it's they've taken a lot of the disease problems out of the plant. But once you get it started, it grows. But there's certain varieties that are a little bit tougher to grow than others. I'm not sure if there's a certain one you were looking at, but
Well, I don't know, I got it at your place the first one I got was a gift, and the second one I got from you guys, I don't remember them.
and it takes a while for it
Victoria,
to.
I think was what it was called.
Okay, the Victoria, that's a seed-grown variety, and it's pretty common.
It was supposed to be durable or whatever.
Yeah, it should be.
My soil was not.
Is tissue grown one better?
Well, yeah, the tissue, the cherry red is usually the best one because that's a little bulkier plant. And it's got more of a better root when you buy it. But the Victoria that's a popular one. But yeah, I'm not sure why it wouldn't take off for you though.
I think it must just be my soil. Maybe it's not gonna.
You'd think it would like sandy soil. I don't
Yeah,
know.
usually rhubarb does really well in sandy soil, but
Oh, really?
maybe if you,
You need a lot of sun.
Rhubarb mojo, I guess.
yeah, just maybe throw
Like
a
my
little bit
pepper
of
mojo.
yeah, compost or something around it and work it into the soil. If it's too sandy, it might not work, but if it's kind of a sandy loam like what we have around here, it usually is that's good enough for rhubarb.
Well, maybe third will be the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I want it to grow for you. Gotta have your rhubarb pie.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
That's why I better get back to work.